Hi, and welcome to Diatonic Dissection, a series where we'll dissect various pieces of video game music to see how they work and learn how to play them. I want these videos to be for musicians as well as non-musicians, so I'll explain some of the concepts along the way. As always, in deference to the almighty algorithm and its ever-watching eye, please like, share, subscribe, etc. Any questions, comments, abuse, anything of that ilk, please leave down below in the comment section, or feel free to track me down on one of the social media accounts linked below. In the description box below you'll see a link to a Google Drive where you can download tabs and sheet music in various formats. I'd recommend that you download them so that you can follow along and see what's going on for yourselves. Today we'll be tackling Darren Korb's Through Asphodel from 2019's Hades, made by Supergiant Games. The track is much simpler than the last video for Rage of the Myrmidons, but it's complicated in its own way, involving non-repeating patterns and the like, but we'll get into those when we reach them. The important overarching details are that the key is in D minor and the tempo is 140 beats per minute, and the instruments used for this version are one clean guitar, one distorted guitar, one electric bass, one synthesizer, one piano, and drums. All these guitars are tuned to drop D. The information regarding the recording of the track is in the description below, but if you don't feel like reading it, these are the details. The guitar is my ESP PS-1000. The bass is my Dingwall NG3 6-string. The synth is a Korg Kross. The drums are provided by Toontrack's EZDrummer 2. The tones come from my Neural DSP quad Cortex, and it was all recorded using Reaper. With those details out of the way, let's get started. As with the previous video, the track will be divided up into sections. We'll start each section with the ensemble performance of all the instruments and then break it down into its constituent parts. So, without further ado, let's get started with section A. Firstly, let's talk about the drums. The drum part from section A repeats all the way through to section I. As a result, we'll discuss it now and then never speak of it again. The part is based on a single clave pattern, which we discussed in the previous video on Rage of the Myrmidons, and it can be counted as 3, 3, and 2. Now, for the guitars and bass. The parts are pretty similar and have the same flourishes at the end of a 4-bar cycle, but these flourishes are based on an ascending 4-note ascending pattern consisting of D, E flat, A, and B flat. Now, finally, the synth. It comes in at bar 14 and floats over the other instruments. The main thing of interest is that in bar 21 there is an accidental G flat or F sharp that creates a D major chord when mixed with the guitar part. The video will start at bar 13 so you don't have to sit through 18 seconds of me fiddling about with the keyboard. Time for section B. The drums are still doing their thing from section A in case you've already forgotten. The guitars and bass get a far more intricate part and they're playing in unison like section A. These parts are an iteration of the end of phrase flourishes from section A. The E flats are now E naturals and there are some flourishes thrown in there for good measure. Much like the guitar and bass parts, the synth for section B is an iteration of the part it plays in section A. When we reach bar 37, we see the introduction of a theme that the synth will return to several times throughout the course of the entire track. The theme is 8 bars long and will take some explanation. The first bar contains a held A on top with a drop from D to A. The next 3 bars use descending thirds with octaves in half note. After each bar, the next one is the next note up from its predecessor. The first bar is B flat to G, and then the next is A to F, and so on and so forth. The final 4 bars of the theme are the same as the first 4 bars, except the 5th bar is an inversion of bar 1, so going up instead of down, and the final 3 bars are just the upper octave parts of bars 2 to 4. Section C is a short 8-bar interlude and the drums are still doing their thing. The guitar is playing power or 5th chords, but there are some accidentals here. For example, the first chord change goes from D to G flat or F sharp instead of F, giving it a major sound, as the 3rd note in the minor scale is flattened. The bass is playing the same rhythm as the guitar part with some slight differences in notes. The bass part ends with an octave drop on A. The synth for section C isn't doing much, but it will reappear in section K. For section D, on guitar and bass, we see a return to section A, but the end of phrase patterns are in a different order. The synth for section D is different from its section A counterpart. Section E is a repeat of section D for guitars and bass with all that octave jumping goodness. The synth in section E has 8 different first bars, but the second set of 8 bars are the same pattern of descending thirds that we did see in section B. Section F is just a repeat of Section C, but it is twice as long. The synth part for Section F is made up of variations of the parts played in Section C. Section G is not a repeat of the previous section. The drums are still doing the same thing as they were in sections A, B, C, D, E and F, and as we're not yet in section I, they will continue to do so. The guitar and bass are playing in unison. Be aware that the second tone in this part is an accidental D flat or C sharp. The bass is pretty much playing the same part as the guitar, but there are some deviations and turnarounds, so here is the clip of that. The synth part is new, but has very similar features to what was playing in sections B and E with the movement in thirds. Very little happens in section H, as it is just a bridging section, so here are the guitar and bass parts together. As we still haven't reached section I, the drums are still playing the same part. Section I sees the clean guitar being swapped out for a distorted tone, and the drums finally get a chance to shine. The same rhythmic motif is used by the drums in the first 16 bars of Section I, bars 131 to 147, but there are some fills thrown in. Throughout the fills, the bass drum is played on the beat to give it a very driving rhythm. For the last 8 bars of the section, the drums are playing a simple rock beat with embellishments. For the guitar and bass, sections A and D make a return for section I, the main addition being the slides down to the open strings that you will see in the clips. The synth for section I is almost exactly the same as that played in section A, except it is an octave up and that there is a different note at the end, as you can see here on the 2 pieces of music side by side. The drums in section J are similar to those in section I, as they're playing fills before settling into a groove. Note that in bar 163 that the snare hits are on the beat before the groove starts properly. The guitar and bass parts for J are repeats of sections B and E, so absolutely nothing to look into in any detail. synth part is the same for section J as it was in section B, except the first 8 bars are played an octave higher, so we're reaching the kind of pitches that only dogs can hear. After that, the descending thirds pattern from section B reappears. To close the section out, the descending thirds repeat, but instead of being an octave apart, they are now a third apart. Section K is the same as section C in that it is a very short bridging section. The main difference being that the guitar, instead of playing power or 5th chords, is now playing mostly octaves. As for the bass and synth, they are pretty much the same. For section L, the drums are pretty much the same, and much like section I, the fills lead into a groove. The guitar and bass for section L is a repeat of section I, so here are the guitar and bass clips back to back. For once, the synth part is not just a direct repeat of a previous section. Instead, the synth in section L is a variation on the part played by the synth in section D. Section M sees us return to the jumping octaves of sections B, E and J. The drums are playing a rhythm that lines up with the guitar and bass part before settling into a groove again, like its previous sections. Be aware that the big 16th note triplet fill runs into section N. For guitars and bass, we've seen it before, so here are the clips back to back, as we don't need to dissect anything. The synth for section M is a combination of two previous parts from sections B, E and J. The first half is from section E, but the latter half is from section J, with the final few descending thirds being a third harmony apart rather than an octave. Section N has the same relationship to section K that section F has to section C. Both are repeats of this short section, but they are twice as long. The drums are happily grooving along with the odd flourish thrown in. For section N, the guitar and bass parts are repeats, so again, here they are back to back. The synth for section N is a direct repeat of section F. Unlike previous sections, which are multiple repeats of other sections, Section O is the only time we see a repeat of Section G. The drums for Section O are similar to those seen in Section M, with that delayed backbeat and the fills at the end of the 2-bar phrase, but for the end of this section there is a very big build-up using the crash cymbals, snare and bass drum to give it a really big ramp up before ending in Section P. It's very late in the track, but there is something very interesting going on between the guitar and bass parts. In Section G, the guitar and bass were playing the same bass note. However, in Section O, they are a 6th or inverted 3rd part for most of it. The guitar itself is playing octaves instead of power chords like in Section G. As mentioned before, the bass is mostly playing the 6th of whatever the guitar is playing, but there is also quite a bit of movement in the section. The synth part for Section O is exactly the same as the part it plays in Section G. If you have been paying attention, you will have noticed that in the list of instruments used, one of them was a piano, and we had yet to see it. It appears in Section O, right before the end of the track. Much like the guitar and bass parts, the piano is playing in harmony with the synth part. Whether this was intentional or not, I don't know, you'd have to ask Mr. Korb himself, but the harmonic interval decreases from a 6th to a 5th to a 4th and then to a 3rd across bars 231 to 238. For the rest of the section, the two parts are mostly a 6th apart. And finally, we have reached Section P, the final section of the track. And it is very, very, very short. Much in the way the track began, it is very simple and features just the guitar, bass and drums playing the rhythm that we saw at the start. And that's it. We have dissected through Asphodel from the Hades soundtrack. Thank you very much for watching if you've lasted this long. If you have any comments, suggestions, requests, abuse, anything like that, please leave them in the comments down below, or contact me on one of the social media accounts linked in the description box. Don't forget that the link is there to the Google Drive so you can download all the music yourself. Please feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell, sacrifice an infant to the great dark unknown, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye!